There is a certain kind of Scottish man born in 1966 who does not explain himself very often. Not because he has nothing to say, and certainly not because nothing is going on beneath the surface. Usually it is the opposite. He has spent a lifetime watching, listening, working things out, holding things together, and quietly surviving moments that nobody ever thought to call traumatic at the time. He grew up before phones became companions, before every emotion needed a name, before every inconvenience became a crisis, and before the private self was turned into something to be posted, performed, measured, and commented on. He was not raised by algorithms. He was raised in a world of schoolyards, football pitches, Saturday television, cold mornings, wet pavements, and streets where children were expected to disappear for hours and somehow return when they were hungry. It was a world of working men coming home tired, mothers getting on with it, neighbors watching from behind curtains, and adults who believed most problems could be solved with tea, silence, a sharp joke, or a firm "you'll be fine." Nobody called it resilience. Nobody called it independence. Nobody called it emotional regulation. It was just life. You went out, you came back, you learned, and if something went wrong, the first question was rarely, "How did that make you feel?" It was more likely, "What did you do?" That matters because the Scottish Gen X man learned early that the world was not especially interested in his inner weather. If he was bored, he had to find something to do. If he was upset, he was expected to get through it. If he was scared, he learned not to show too much of it. If he failed, he learned to try again without expecting a standing ovation for the effort. The result was not always emotional openness, but it was a certain kind of practical intelligence. The kind that reads a room before speaking, spots nonsense before it has finished introducing itself, and understands that panic rarely improves a situation. A boy born in Scotland in 1966 entered childhood in the 1970s when the world still felt physical. Television had only a few channels. Music came through radios, records, and later cassette tapes. Football was not yet a global entertainment product polished to within an inch of its life. It was mud, noise, arguments, heroes, disappointment, and identity. Childhood happened outdoors in alleys, parks, schemes, schoolyards, spare ground, and wherever a ball could be kicked without too many windows being broken. There was boredom then, but boredom did work that we barely understand now. It stretched time, it forced imagination. It made children invent games, arguments, alliances, rivalries, and whole worlds out of nothing. A stick became a sword, a wall became a goal, a patch of grass became Hampton. Nobody needed a notification to feel alive. The day itself was enough, even when it was gray, cold, and absolutely determined to rain sideways. Then came the teenage years and the world began to shift. The early 1980s arrived with unemployment on the news, politics in the air, new music in the bedrooms, arcade machines glowing in dark corners, VHS tapes changing Saturday nights, and home computers beginning to whisper that the future would not look like the past. The Scottish Gen X teenager stood between two eras. Behind him was the old world of heavy industry, fixed roles, public authority, and communities that could be warm and suffocating at the same time. Ahead of him was the digital world, still primitive, still blinking in green letters, but already coming. That is why this generation is unusual. They are not fully analog and not fully digital. They remember the dignity of being unreachable, but they adapted to email, mobile, streaming, social media, and now artificial intelligence. They remember arranging to meet someone at a certain time and simply trusting that both people would appear. No live location, no blue ticks, no backup plan, just show up or don't and accept the consequences. That kind of life produced a different nervous system. It created people who could wait, people who could improvise, people who were comfortable with silence because silence was not empty then, it was normal. It gave them a built-in suspicion of hype because they had seen enough promises come and go. It gave them a dark humor because sometimes laughter was the only socially acceptable way of admitting that life was hard. And then you add Scotland, which gives the whole thing a sharper edge. The Scottish Gen X man inherited a culture where affection often arrived disguised as mockery, where praise could be so understated it needed a translator, and where "you're no bad" might be the emotional equivalent of fireworks. He learned early not to take himself too seriously, partly because nobody else was going to let him. In Scotland, self-importance is treated like an illness best cured by immediate ridicule. This can be brutal, but it can also be useful. It teaches you not to collapse under criticism. It teaches you to distrust people who speak too smoothly. It teaches you to listen for what is not being said. And it teaches you that humor is not just entertainment. Humor is armor. Humor is a pressure valve. Humor is how a room full of people admits pain without anyone having to say the embarrassing part out loud. But there is a cost to being formed this way. The The Scottish Gen X man was trained to cope, and when someone becomes good at coping, people often stop asking whether they are okay. Strength becomes camouflage, reliability becomes a trap. The man who always turns up, always gets on with it, always shrugs and says fine, can end up carrying more than anyone realizes. This is the hidden wound in him. He may not talk about it much, but it is there, not always as drama, more often as tiredness, withdrawal, irritability, a need for solitude that others mistake for coldness, a difficulty saying the softer things directly, a habit of helping practically when what he really means is love. He may not always say, "I care about you," but he will drive across town in bad weather, fix the thing that is broken, lift the heavy object, check the boiler, bring the shopping, stand beside you at the difficult moment, and pretend it was nothing. That is how many men of this generation learn to communicate, not through grand emotional speeches, but through usefulness, through presence, through loyalty, through doing the thing that needed done. And now he finds himself in a modern world that often feels louder, softer, faster, stranger, and more performative than the one that made him. A world where everything is discussed, displayed, branded, analyzed, and turned into content. A world where feelings are public, opinions are instant, and identity is something people seem to redesign every 6 months like a kitchen. No wonder he sometimes looks tired. No wonder he retreats. No wonder silence feels less like loneliness and more like maintenance. Because he remembers another way of being. He remembers a world where not everything had to be explained, where privacy was normal, where you could have a full life without documenting every meal, where you could be intelligent without announcing your intelligence, where you could suffer without turning suffering into a personality, where you could love people deeply and still be slightly awkward about birthdays. This does not make him better than younger generations. That would be too easy and probably too smug. Every generation is shaped by its own weather. But the Scottish Gen X man born in 1966 carries something increasingly rare, the memory of life before the great digital performance began. He knows what it means to be bored, to wait, to make do, to laugh at disaster, to distrust easy answers, and to keep going when nobody is clapping. He is not always fashionable, he is not always expressive, he is not always easy to decode, but he has a kind of old-world operating system that still works in a crisis. He observes before speaking, he laughs before complaining, he repairs before replacing, he values people who show up, he respects effort more than slogans. And somewhere beneath the sarcasm, stubbornness, and silence, there's often a surprisingly deep tenderness, guarded perhaps but real. Born in 1966, he sits between vanished worlds. Old enough to remember terraces, record shops, handwritten letters, smoky pubs, rented videos, phones attached to walls, and childhoods that ran on fresh air and mild danger. Young enough to have adapted to computers, smartphones, streaming, online life, and the strange new age of constant connection. He is a bridge generation, part analog, part digital, part skeptic, part survivor, part hard shell, part soft center. He would rather you did not make a fuss about. And maybe that is the real psychology of him. He was not raised to be impressive, he was not endlessly reassured, he was not carefully polished for public display. He was shaped by weather, work, humor, silence, disappointment, loyalty, and the old Scottish art of getting on with it. He may not explain himself very often, but if you know what to look for, the explanation is everywhere. In the humor, in the restraint, in the loyalty, in the refusal to panic, in the way he still believes that if something matters, you show up. Not loudly, not perfectly, just reliably. Because he was not protected from the world. He was prepared for it. And in the end, that is why the Scottish Gen X man still matters. He was not polished. He was not pampered. He was not performed into existence. He was forged.